C'est-à-dire que, bon, moi je vois des enfants d'abord venir à l'école avec une étoile jaune. J'ai dit aux parents que je ne voulais absolument pas que les enfants viennent avec ça à l'école.
Fait comme malheureusement bon nombre de gens, il a fait confiance à tout le monde quand il a fallu se faire recenser. Il nous a recensés tous en tant que...
A young teacher, just 20 years old, stepping into a world torn apart by war. It's 1942 in Brussels, and the German occupation of Belgium has cast a dark shadow over the country. Jewish children are disappearing, taken from their homes and schools, and no one knows what fate awaits them. This is where Andrée Geulen's story begins, an ordinary woman who became an extraordinary hero. Andrée Geulen was a young schoolteacher when she first encountered the horrors of the German regime. The shift in her life came abruptly when Jewish students in her classroom began showing up with the yellow stars sewn onto their clothes, a mark that singled them out for persecution. It was impossible for Andrée to ignore the fear in their eyes or the injustice of their situation. Instead of turning a blind eye, Andrée made a choice that would change the course of her life and save the lives of many others. She joined the Comité de Défense des Juifs, CDJ, a Jewish defense committee that was working underground to protect Jewish children from deportation to concentration camps. Andrée's mission was incredibly dangerous. The German regime showed no mercy to those who aided Jews, and anyone caught helping could face imprisonment or execution. Despite the constant threat, Andrée dedicated herself to the task with a quiet resolve. She understood the stakes and accepted the risks, all for the sake of saving innocent lives. She would visit Jewish families often in the dead of night to take their children to safety. These children, some as young as a few months old, were placed in convents, orphanages, and with families who were willing to risk their lives to hide them. Andrée made sure they were given new identities, with forged papers and new names, to keep them safe from detection. During the German occupation of Belgium, which began in May 1940 and lasted until the liberation in 1944, the country experienced one of the darkest chapters in its history. The German regime, driven by its anti-Semitic ideology and expansionist ambitions, brought fear, repression, and widespread suffering to Belgium, particularly targeting the Jewish population. Belgium, a small but strategically significant country, was quickly overrun by the German forces at the start of World War II. The Germans immediately imposed strict control over the Belgian population, installing a military administration that enforced German laws and policies. The Belgian government had fled to exile, leaving the country under the brutal rule of the occupiers. The Germans quickly set about restructuring Belgian society to align with their ideological goals. They seized control of the media, censoring any content that did not support their narrative, and they implemented strict curfews, travel restrictions, and rationing. The Gestapo, the German secret police, operated with impunity, arresting, torturing, and executing anyone suspected of resistance activities or anti-German sentiments. For the Jewish community in Belgium, the German occupation was especially terrifying. The Germans quickly began implementing their anti-Semitic policies, aiming to marginalize, isolate, and ultimately exterminate the Jewish population. Jews in Belgium were forced to register with the authorities, marking themselves for future persecution. They were required to wear the yellow Star of David on their clothing, a symbol that isolated them from the rest of society and made them easy targets for harassment and violence. Jewish businesses were systematically destroyed or taken over by non-Jewish Germans and collaborators. Jews were banned from public places, including parks, theaters, and schools. Many were expelled from their homes and forced into overcrowded ghettos or moved to transit camps like Mechelen, where the conditions were deplorable. Food was scarce, medical care was virtually non-existent, and disease was rampant. As the occupation continued, the Germans began mass deportations of Jews to extermination camps in the east, particularly Auschwitz. These deportations were carried out with brutal efficiency. Belgian Jews were rounded up in the middle of the night, dragged from their homes, and packed into cattle cars with little food or water for the long journey to the camps. Most of those deported were never seen again. In 1943, when she received word that the Germans were planning a raid on a Jewish orphanage in Brussels. This orphanage was home to dozens of children who had already been through unimaginable trauma, having lost their families and been forced to live in constant fear. With only hours to act, Andrée sprang into action. She knew that if the Germans found the children, they would be deported to concentration camps, where demise was almost certain. She quickly gathered a group of resistance members and volunteers, coordinating an emergency evacuation. As night fell, Andrée and her team arrived at the orphanage. The children, some as young as 3 or 4, were terrified, clutching their few belongings and holding on to each other for comfort. Andrée, with a calmness that belied the urgency of the situation, reassured them that they were going on a special trip. She couldn't let them see the fear in her eyes. The operation was incredibly risky. The streets were patrolled by German soldiers, and any movement after curfew could lead to arrest. But Andrée knew there was no other choice. One by one, the children were smuggled out of the orphanage, hidden in carts under blankets, or disguised as non-Jewish children. The entire operation took several nerve-wracking hours. In the early hours of the morning, just before the raid was set to begin, Andrée managed to get the last child to safety. When the Germans arrived, they found the orphanage empty. The children were gone, vanished into the night. This daring rescue solidified Andrée's reputation within the resistance as someone who would go to any lengths to protect the innocent. Another dramatic moment in Andrée's life involved the Goldberg family, whose 3 children she had been helping to hide. The Goldbergs had been living in constant fear of discovery, and despite Andrée's best efforts to keep them safe, the Gestapo eventually caught wind of their location. One day, while Andrée was teaching in her classroom, she was summoned to the principal's office. Waiting for her were 2 Gestapo officers. They had found the Goldberg children and were questioning the school staff to see if anyone knew of their whereabouts. Without flinching, Andrée calmly told the officers that she knew nothing of the Goldbergs' current location. The officers, suspicious of her calm demeanor, decided to interrogate her further. They demanded that she accompany them to the Gestapo headquarters for questioning. Andrée knew that if she was taken in, the Goldberg children, and many others she was hiding, would be at risk. She needed to buy time. As the officers turned to leave, Andrée pretended to faint, collapsing dramatically to the floor. The suddenness of it caught the officers off guard, and in the confusion that followed, Andrée was able to escape their clutches. She quickly made her way to the Goldbergs' hiding place and moved them to a new location before the Gestapo could follow up. The Goldberg children survived the war, thanks to Andrée's quick thinking and fearless determination. Perhaps one of the most heartbreaking yet defining moments of Andrée's mission came towards the end of the war. By this time, she had saved hundreds of children, but the toll of the war and the constant fear had left her physically and emotionally exhausted. One day, she received a message from a Jewish family who had heard of her efforts. They were desperate, knowing that their time was running out. They had a young daughter just 5 years old, and they begged Andrée to take her to safety. But this time they had one request. They wanted to say goodbye. Andrée understood the gravity of this request. Many parents she had worked with had been forced to hand over their children without the chance to say a proper farewell, their last memories marred by the terror of separation. This family wanted something different. They wanted their daughter to remember them with love, not fear. Andrée went to the family's apartment, where she found the parents holding their daughter close, tears streaming down their faces. They knew that sending her away was the only way to save her, but it was also the most painful decision they would ever make. The mother knelt down and whispered to her daughter, "You're going on a big adventure, my love. Be brave, and one day we will see each other again." The little girl, sensing her parents' sadness, promised to be brave. Andrée gently took the girl's hand and led her away, leaving the parents behind. As they walked down the street, the little girl turned back to wave at her parents one last time. It was a simple gesture, but one that Andrée knew would stay with her forever. The girl was placed with a loving family and survived the war, but her parents were not as fortunate. They were deported and never returned. The memory of that last goodbye haunted Andrée for years, a reminder of the heavy cost of war and the sacrifices made by so many. One day at a German checkpoint, where she outwitted the German soldiers using nothing but her quick thinking and nerves of steel. Andrée was escorting a group of Jewish children out of Brussels to a safer location in the countryside. The children were disguised as Christian orphans with false identities carefully crafted by the resistance network. Everything was going according to plan until they reached a checkpoint manned by German soldiers. The soldiers, suspicious of any unusual movement, stopped the group and demanded to see their papers. Andrée knew that if the soldiers inspected the children too closely, they would likely see through the disguises and discover their true identities. The entire group's lives hung in the balance. Thinking fast, Andrée pretended to be a strict, no-nonsense Catholic nun. She scolded the children loudly in front of the soldiers, chastising them for making noise and not standing in line properly. Her harsh tone and authoritative demeanor caught the soldiers off guard. To them, she appeared to be nothing more than a severe teacher escorting a group of unruly children. One of the soldiers, however, wasn't entirely convinced. He stepped forward and demanded to inspect the children more closely. In that moment, Andrée made a bold move. She turned her wrath on the soldier himself. She berated him for daring to question her authority and wasting time with such nonsense when she had important duties to attend to. The audacity of her outburst was so unexpected that the soldier hesitated, uncertain of how to respond. Andrée's gamble paid off. The soldier, not wanting to engage further with this seemingly overbearing nun, waved them through, deciding it wasn't worth the trouble. As they passed the checkpoint, Andrée maintained her stern facade until they were out of sight, but inside, her heart was racing. Once they were safely away from the checkpoint, Andrée let out a sigh of relief. The children, sensing they were out of danger, looked up at her with a mixture of awe and gratitude. They had no idea how close they had come to being discovered, but they knew that this woman, who had just saved their lives, was someone extraordinary. This ruse at the checkpoint became one of the many stories that spread through the resistance, further cementing Andrée Geulen's reputation as a fearless and resourceful protector of the innocent. This was a very unbelievable act and moment when she orchestrated a daring prison break that would solidify her status as a heroic figure in the resistance movement. By 1944, Andrée had become deeply embedded in the underground resistance, known not just for saving children, but also for her role in more complex and dangerous operations. Word came to her that a group of Jewish resistance members, including several children she had previously saved, had been captured by the Germans and were being held in a heavily guarded prison awaiting deportation to a concentration camp. The situation was dire, and time was running out. Andrée knew that a conventional rescue mission would be too risky, but she also knew she couldn't abandon those who had trusted her with their lives. She devised an audacious plan that would rely on deception, careful timing, and a little bit of luck. Disguised as a Red Cross nurse, Andrée gained entry to the prison by convincing the guards that she needed to inspect the health conditions of the prisoners. Her calm demeanor and flawless German, skills she had honed throughout the war, allowed her to move through the prison without raising suspicion. Inside, she quickly located the resistance members and quietly relayed her plan to them. They would have to act fast. Andrée had arranged for a distraction outside the prison, a small explosion set by other resistance fighters that would draw the guards away from their posts for just a few crucial minutes. When the explosion went off, chaos erupted in the prison. Andrée, seizing the moment, led the prisoners out of their cells and through a series of service tunnels she had scouted earlier. The group moved swiftly and silently, avoiding patrols and slipping out of the prison before the guards could regroup. The escape was nothing short of miraculous. Andrée and the prisoners made their way to a safe house where they were sheltered until they could be moved to a more secure location. The success of the operation was a huge boost to the morale of the resistance and dealt a significant blow to the Germans, who never suspected that such a bold rescue could have been pulled off right under their noses. The story of the prison break spread like wildfire through the resistance and the wider community. Andrée Geulen was hailed as a hero, not just for her bravery, but for her unwavering commitment to saving lives, no matter the personal risk. It was actions like these that earned her the nickname Belgian Angel and secured her place as one of the most revered figures in the history of the Belgian resistance. It was a tough night. Scenes looked pretty unspeakable. In response to the assassination of a German officer by the Belgian resistance, German forces carried out a horrific reprisal. Early on the morning of August 18, 1944, German soldiers, along with Belgian collaborators from the Rexist Party, raided the small town of Courcelles. They randomly rounded up civilians, many of whom had no connection to the resistance, and took them to a local school, which had been turned into a makeshift detention center. Without any trial or due process, the prisoners were interrogated, tortured, and brutally beaten. Later that day, the Germans and their collaborators dragged 27 men out of the school and executed them by firing squad in a nearby field. The bodies were left in the open as a grim warning to others who might consider resisting the occupation. This massacre left the town of Courcelles in shock and grief, a stark example of the ruthless and arbitrary violence employed by the Germans to maintain control. The Mechelen, Malines transit camp, also known as Kaserne Dossen, was a former army barracks in Belgium that the Germans transformed into a central collection point for Jews and Romani before deporting them to Auschwitz and other extermination camps. Between 1942 and 1944, over 25,000 Jews, including thousands of children, were detained at Mechelen before being sent to their doom. The conditions in the camp were appalling. Families were often separated upon arrival, with women and children held in separate quarters from men. The overcrowding was severe, with many forced to sleep on the floor or share beds. Food was scarce and of poor quality, leading to malnutrition and disease. The constant fear of deportation hung over the camp, as transports to Auschwitz occurred regularly, sometimes multiple times a week. One of the most tragic aspects of Mechelen was the way children were treated. Many Jewish children, some as young as a few months old, were separated from their parents and sent to the camp alone. In many cases, these children were later deported to Auschwitz, where they were immediately sent to the gas chambers upon arrival. In Brussels, the Gestapo operated from the Hotel Metropole, which they converted into their headquarters. Here, they carried out horrific acts of torture against anyone suspected of being involved with the resistance or of having Jewish ancestry. The Gestapo used both psychological and physical torture to extract information or simply to instill fear in the population. Victims were often taken to the Hotel Metropole in the dead of night, where they were interrogated in small, dark rooms. The methods of torture were brutal. Beatings with fists, batons, and iron bars were common, as were electric shocks and waterboarding. Some prisoners were subjected to mock executions, while others were forced to witness the torture of their loved ones. One infamous case involved a young woman named Gabrielle Petit, a member of the Belgian resistance who was captured by the Gestapo in 1943. Despite enduring weeks of torture, Gabrielle refused to betray her comrades. She was eventually executed by firing squad, becoming a symbol of courage and resistance for the Belgian people. Although Oradour-sur-Glane is in France, its story resonated deeply with occupied Belgium, symbolizing the type of terror that could occur anywhere under German rule. On June 10, 1944, German SS troops massacred 642 men, women, and children in the French village of Oradour-sur-Glane as a reprisal for resistance activities. In Belgium, similar atrocities occurred, although on a smaller scale. Villages suspected of harboring resistance fighters or supporting anti-German activities were often subject to brutal reprisals. One such incident occurred in the village of Vinkt in May 1940. German soldiers, furious at the local resistance, executed 140 civilians, many of whom were shot in the back of the head while kneeling. The fear that the same fate could befall any Belgian village or town created an atmosphere of constant terror. Stories of these atrocities spread quickly, reinforcing the sense of helplessness and dread among the Belgian population. Antwerp, home to a significant Jewish community, became a primary target for German persecution. Starting in 1942, the German forces, assisted by local collaborators, conducted mass raids on the Jewish population. These raids were swift and brutal. Jewish families were dragged from their homes in the middle of the night, given little time to gather their belongings before being loaded onto trucks and transported to Mechelen. The Jewish community in Antwerp, once vibrant and thriving, was decimated. Synagogues were desecrated, Jewish businesses looted, and cultural institutions destroyed. The Germans sought to erase not just the people, but also the rich cultural heritage of the Jewish community. In March 1943, when Simon was just 11 years old, the Gestapo raided the Granowski home. The family had been in hiding, but their location was betrayed, leading to their arrest. Simon, his mother Chana, and his sister Ida were rounded up and taken to the Mechelen transit camp, where thousands of Belgian Jews awaited deportation to the extermination camps in the east. The conditions at Mechelen were grim. Families were separated, and the fear of what lay ahead was palpable. On April 19, 1943, the Granowski family was placed on Convoy number 20, a train bound for Auschwitz, one of the most notorious camps of the Holocaust. This convoy was infamous because it was one of the few transports during World War II where a rescue attempt was made. Members of the Belgian resistance tried to stop the train, and while they managed to free some prisoners, most, including Simon and his family, remained on board. As the train rumbled toward its grim destination, Chana Granowski made a decision that would save her son's life. She knew that once they reached Auschwitz, they would likely be separated, and the chances of survival were slim. In a moment of unimaginable courage and love, she pushed Simon toward the open door of the cattle car. She told him to jump, urging him to escape and save himself. The decision was heart-wrenching. Simon, terrified and unsure, hesitated, but with his mother's insistence, he finally leaped from the moving train. He hit the ground hard, bruised and disoriented, but alive. As he lay in the dirt, the train sped away, carrying his mother and sister to Auschwitz, where they would both perish in the gas chambers. After escaping the train, Simon was alone in a hostile and dangerous world. He was just a child, but he understood the gravity of his situation. He began wandering through the Belgian countryside, desperate to find shelter and safety. Fortunately, he encountered kind strangers who, at great personal risk, took him in and hid him from the authorities. For months, Simon moved from one hiding place to another, relying on the kindness and bravery of non-Jewish Belgians who refused to stand by while innocent lives were being destroyed. These people, part of the underground resistance, provided him with false papers and a new identity. Simon was hidden in attics, basements, and remote farmhouses, always on the move to avoid detection by the Gestapo. When the war finally ended in 1945, Simon was one of the few Jewish children in Belgium to survive the Holocaust. He returned to Brussels, but the joy of liberation was bittersweet. His mother and sister were gone, and he was now an orphan in a world that had been forever changed by the horrors of the Holocaust. Despite the immense trauma and loss, Simon Granowski went on to build a life for himself. He studied law and became an attorney, dedicating his life to justice and remembrance. In the years that followed, Simon began to speak publicly about his experiences during the war, sharing his story with audiences around the world. He became a symbol of survival and resilience, and his story served as a powerful reminder of the human cost of hatred and intolerance. Andrée Geulen, like the strangers who sheltered Simon, was driven by an unwavering commitment to protect the innocent, particularly Jewish children, from the horrors of the Holocaust. During the German occupation, Belgium became a perilous place for Jewish families who faced the constant threat of arrest, deportation, and peril. Amid this fear, Andrée recognized the urgency of the situation and joined the underground network known as the Comité de Défense des Juifs, Jewish Defense Committee. Her mission was clear: to save as many Jewish children as possible from the clutches of the Gestapo. Just as Simon was hidden by brave Belgians who shielded him from the Germans, Andrée played a crucial role in organizing the concealment of hundreds of Jewish children. She would often visit families in the dead of night, urging parents to entrust their children to her care. It was a heart-wrenching task, convincing parents to part with their children in the hope that they might survive, much like Simon's mother made the agonizing decision to push him off the train. For Chana Granowski, it was the decision to push her son off the train, sacrificing herself to give Simon a chance at life. For Andrée, it was the countless decisions to smuggle children to safety, often at great personal risk. She knew that being caught could mean torture, imprisonment, or even execution, but she pressed on, driven by a sense of moral duty and compassion. Andrée Geulen, a woman of remarkable courage and unwavering resolve, stands as a true heroine in the annals of history. Through her selfless acts during one of humanity's darkest hours, she embodied the very essence of bravery and compassion. Risking her life to save over 300 Jewish children during the Holocaust, Andrée's legacy is not just a testament to her own courage, but a beacon of hope and a reminder of the profound impact one person can have in the face of evil. Her story will forever inspire generations to come, teaching us that even in the darkest times, the light of human decency and love can shine through.